Hi everyone, welcome. I'm Michelle Charlton. I'm from Skills Education. Thanks so much for joining us today. We've got Deb Carr back to present session 4 in her 10 series session on 10 tips to do RPL better. Now, while you're getting settled, I'll just give you a bit of a heads up about some of the functionalities that we're going to be using in today's session. We've got the chat window open and ready, so if you'd like to pop in a shout out and a hello, you're welcome to do that in the chat. Deb has also provided some really handy links to takeaways for you. So have a look at those. They're available right now in the handouts tab, so you'll be able to download those straight away onto your computer. Exploring those tabs is a wonderful way to get used to the way that we'd like you to interact with today's session. By all means, if you've got a question or a comment, pop it into the chat and we'll make sure that Deb can answer those for you as we go through. I just also need to let you know that today's session is being recorded. So what that means is that after this live session has finished, people who have registered for the session but weren't able to attend the live event will be able to access the recording. And if you're doing that, welcome and hello. Log on through the Better portal. You'll be able to access the recording that way. You'll also get an email after the event's finished, just alerting you to the fact that the recording is available for viewing, and keep an eye out for that email because it'll also ask for feedback on the session. By submitting your feedback, it can be blank, but certainly we know that our presenters value your input. By submitting that actual feedback form, you trigger your record of PD for the session. So that's a good way to keep track of the PD that you're undertaking. Now, that's the admin out of the way. I just want to let you know that Deb is here. She's, as I said, going to talk about session 4 in her series about ways that RTOs can approach RPL in a more efficient way. Over the last 3 weeks, we've heard a number of different things about RPL, the advantages of having competent and experienced staff who are solely dedicated to RPL as a benefit to the RTO. We've also examined how teaching RPL can help candidates move through that RPL process a little bit more smoothly, and also how social learning can be a positive aspect of RPL practice. But today, on the next session, in the series, Deb's going to prompt us to think about how we advertise RPL as an offering through our RTO. Now, to give you some background on Deb, she really is a perpetual enthusiast around lifelong learning programs and, true to her own belief in lifelong learning, has just recently completed a Masters of Education. Her thesis was on the RPL candidate, a neglected stakeholder. And Deb's course was through CDU and included an international study tour to Germany and Thailand. So her current contract job is with VetAssess, and she's privileged in that role to be able to help other countries implement and improve their RPL frameworks. So we've definitely got someone with a lot of experience around RPL on the session with us today. And given that RPL is a mandatory requirement for all RTOs, this is a series that really promises to provide insights into the ways that this can be done in different and or better ways. So we're very lucky to have Deb here. Without further ado, I'm just going to welcome Deb and hand over.
Thank you, Michelle. It certainly is a pleasure to be here today for the 4th session, Advertise Carefully, Build Accurate Expectations. So these sessions are for RPL program managers and practitioners that seek to do RPL better. Today, I'll share my findings from my research that were relevant to this particular topic, and also share an interview with Brian West, Managing Director of Fortress Learning. Brian couldn't make it today in our audience, but Emma, the National Training Manager for Fortress Learning, is here and welcomes questions later. A note for our international audience, context is in the Australian VET system. RPL assesses informal learning as per defined in our AQF. My research revealed many problems associated with the practice of RPL. No surprises there. As I continue to research, listen and practice, potential solutions are evolving. So this 10-part series delivers possible solutions to doing RPL better, mainly at program level. I think these will improve RPL practice because they speak directly to candidates' experience. We do have systemic problems with RPL in our country, mainly funding and overly prescriptive units, from my opinion. But these sessions still recognise we can do RPL better within the system that we have. So Australia's national competency-based RPL framework is envied by many, many countries. The changing nature of work, globalisation, ageing demographics, and the rapid pace of technological advancement drive national imperatives for RPL. COVID-19 has placed an even more imperative on RPL. RPL can make skills more visual to individuals and employers. In this way, RPL can improve the efficient use of skills, reducing underemployment. The efficient use of skills directly impacts our economy and social fabric. This webinar is to inform your strategic decision about your RPL program with evidence and case studies of good practice. This is not a platform to check compliance or technical discussions. We do encourage you to share contact details with each other in the pursuit of good RPL practice. So a couple of RPL newsworthy mentions. I recently attended CEDA's live stream on Rebuilding Australia's Workforce, presented by Senator Michaela Cash, Hudson Recruitment and Deloitte and SEEK. There was a lot of talk about transferable skills and how to empower displaced workers to identify those and as they seek alternative pathways to new and different jobs. I've included the link of the webinar if you're interested in listening. One of the benefits of RPL is that it helps people articulate better their skills and knowledge and identify gaps. This empowers them in managing their career. So I've thought about this session a lot. RTOs need to be part of the solution for rebuilding our workforce. And if I were an RPL program manager, I would consider directing potential students to the Skills Match tool, joboutlook.gov.au. This is a really good first port of call for those contemplating career transitions. I'd connect with Career Transition Assistance Commonwealth Program. This program is for mature age displaced workers. It helps them develop confidence, resilience in training, digital skills, and identify strengths and how they can transfer to different industries. I've included the link here too. This program could augment your RPL program. There's also some RTOs offering this program. I would cater for those disproportionately impacted, women, older workers, young people, and people living in the regions. I'd work closely with employers in growing and diversifying their workforce by using RPL as an organisational TNA tool. OECD released a report recently on things VET can do in response to the global crisis of COVID-19. Included in the report was a call on VET systems across the world to utilise RPL as a direct route to qualifications, particularly for vulnerable groups, unfinished apprentices and adult workers. News from the NCVR on how Australia uses RPL there's a report I've included in your handouts. Some of that analysis may help your marketing strategies. So only 3% of assessments use RPL. That's trending downwards. However, the domestic fee-for-service outfunds RPL compared to government. There's a market. International fee-for-service, RPL is growing. This report also shows those qualifications and industries that mostly have used RPL. I'll just make a note there. There's some assumptions throughout the NCVR report that I not necessarily agree with. Other sessions. So next week's sessions is on keeping assessment tools flexible. Wendy Cato and Emma Cyber will join me. Number 6 is around some basics to keep candidates engaged. 7, fee for service is the biggest funder for RPL, and customers base their decisions not only on price. Some business models that work will be shared on this session. Number 8, throw out the RPL info book. It's intimidating and not that helpful. Number 9, invest in industry expertise. John Price will join us for that session. That's very exciting. Number 10, build partnerships with employers. The dreaded third-party report is the second biggest difficulty candidates face. So as Michelle mentioned, this was part of my thesis with CDU. The study consisted of 2 stages. I interviewed 21 assessors with collectively experience of over 5,000 RPL assessments, going across all AQF levels, all institution types, and many different training packages. They shared over 264 expressions of difficulty. I then interviewed 11 candidates over 5 months. They happened to be candidates in seeking RPL in the TAU training package. I asked about their difficulties that they were experiencing, their confidence in being successful, and how they were coping with those difficulties. So assessors defined mindset as the largest difficulty for candidates. Delving deeper into what assessors defined as mindset difficulties, I found 62% of assessors identified candidates had expectations of RPL being easy, easier, quicker, requiring no or minimal effort, and this caused problems with engaging in the RPL process. So inaccurate expectations of effort was seen by assessors as a mindset difficulty in and of itself. Undoubtedly, expectations of it being easy impacts other negative mindsets such as loss of confidence, can't be bothered once they know what the process is involved, and motivation. Additionally, expectations of effort influence non-mindset difficulties such as challenges with time. Candidates frequently said they haven't allocated enough time in their busy schedules because they didn't expect it to require so much effort. When I spoke with candidates, expectations of it being easier and quicker was definitely a mindset difficulty. Not only that, but expectations seem to impact motivation. "55% of candidates expressed difficulties in coming to terms with effort required in comparison to expectations. Candidates are tackling their frustrations as a result of discovering the process is much more demanding and requiring more effort than expected. This difficulty impacts on continued RPL engagement." But I guess for me, I never imagined it to be so difficult. I don't mean it to be a tick and flick, but I actually thought it would be a little easier than it has been. Found my brain was that tired at the end of the day, I just couldn't make sense of things. I came into RPL thinking, I know how this works, and now you just slap me in the face. It's amazing. My thought is that how much more likely this would be a problem with non-TAE candidates who are much more likely to have inaccurate expectations of RPL. So 73% of candidates became demotivated during the process. Many candidates are questioning their choice and benefits of doing RPL and feel stuck in the process. It wasn't what they expected. Many are demotivated because of the tedious nature of the process. The decreased motivation also seems to be a response to the mounting difficulties and the subsequent demand for effort. I'm stuck, like in Shakespeare, steeped in blood now. I've got to keep going. I can't back out now. I've accepted my fate. They felt frustrated at the tedious nature of the process. I feel like it's just such a drag, so my motivation is like zero. I haven't done anything since I last spoke to you except asked for another RPL guide. And I haven't even opened it. Just no motivation. I'm at the stage where I have to tidy it up and make it readable for the assessor. I find it quite tedious. I look at it and my mind just freezes. Reduce perceived benefits. Why am I bothering? It's not actually going to benefit me as much as I initially thought. The mindset here seems to navigate effort versus perceived benefit. Expectations do impact on the level of frustration. "82% of candidates said that they had difficulty with managing time for RPL. Interviews with candidates revealed the need for focused time rather than snippets of time here and there, as many candidates had scheduled. Additionally, they all grossly underestimated the time that was needed to do it. One candidate said he needed at least 2 hours at a time, which allowed him to refocus and work out where he was up to and then get some actually done. Another said they had doubled the initial estimated timelines. These insights are probably not a surprise to you, but now we can be sure that almost all candidates will be going through this, because TAE candidates, if anyone, would have accurate expectations. You would think these ones would. How much more inaccurate would the expectations, again, of those that do not understand the sector? In putting this webinar together for you, I wanted to understand if there is theory behind how expectations impact mindsets. There is, as it happens, Vroom's expectancy theory. I mentioned before that inaccurate expectations impact motivation. Vroom's expectancy theory relates to workers. It also goes a long way to explain the mindset of candidates in regard to motivation in RPL. Expectancy theory says that a person is motivated to the degree that he or she believes that, will my effort lead to acceptable performance? Can I do this? Expectancy is the belief I can do this and is based on an individual's past experience, self-confidence, and the perceived difficulty of the goal. It's really important for candidates to know what will be involved so they can work out, if I put in the effort, will I be successful? What is the effort I need to do RPL? 2, will performance be rewarded? Will I receive the reward? In fact, what is the reward? Once I put in the effort and I can do it, will I get the reward? The big question is exactly what is the reward? Is it RPL granted? Or is it being assessed? Or is it about identifying my gaps, which then can help me to target my learning? Is the reward worth the effort? The value. This is very personal and can be intrinsic or extrinsic. Candidates were surprised about how much effort was involved. Overall, however, candidates thought RPL was still a great idea and would not like to see it removed. They see value in it, but they were disappointed with how it was implemented. So Vroom's expectancy theory shows that candidates do not simply act of strong internal drives, unmet needs, or the application of rewards. Instead, they are rational people whose beliefs, perceptions, and probability estimates influence their behaviour. When efficacy expectations are not accurate. Can I do this? Expectations of the RPL process and how difficult it is informs potential candidates' efficacy expectations. Can I do this? Efficacy is the ability to produce a desired or intended result. When my efforts are not producing the goods, so to speak, the feedback loop suggests 3 mental responses. All these mental responses were evident throughout my research. My self-efficacy estimation is poor. I am not able. I am no good at this RPL process. It must be me. I'm too stupid. That the task is more difficult than I thought. This is harder than I thought. This makes me very frustrated. That my fundamental assumptions underpinning my expectation estimations are flawed. Some of it's out of my control. I expected help. It takes more time. The experience of frustration and loss of confidence is caused by misjudging one's own abilities, likelihood of success, or how difficult the task is. This is why building accurate expectations is so important. So if I were an RTO, I would build accurate expectations of time and effort and how to schedule out the RPL. Change the perceived value of RPL to career management tool. Identifying gaps is just as important as recognising current competencies. I'd understand their expectations. I'd talk about what success is for them. I read an interesting article, Forbes leadership article. Stop letting your expectations feed your frustrations. It shared many of us have no idea of our expectations behind our decisions and emotional responses. We haven't actually communicated our hopes or expectations to other parties. So I would try to understand their expectations and have them discuss, what are your current expectations of this RPL? I would have them articulate those expectations to me. Building accurate expectations of the likelihood of success is a little bit more tricky. Pre-enrollment screening helps candidates self-assess whether they are a good candidate with some level of likelihood of being awarded competent. It is arguably one of the most difficult conundrums of the RPL construct because one cannot know for sure if someone will be successful until the assessment takes place. One candidate said the pre-assessment was great, like ensuring that you actually had at least a baseline level to go into the program. But another said she was not informed before enrollment that much of her experience was not relevant. Interestingly, assessors said candidates typically did not understand RPL until they actually started doing it, no matter the pre-enrollment preparedness. So it is tricky, but asking candidates to articulate their expectations will reduce this disconnect. I did not ask candidates directly whether the reward was worth the effort. I, however, did ask them their opinion of RPL after they had progressed substantially through the application. There were mixed results. Everything in the yes column motivates candidates to choose RPL pathway. These are the features and benefits RTOs can use to market their RPL programs. They like the feeling of empowerment it gives them. They like the fact that they did actually learn stuff. The flexibility as opposed to coursework options was frequently mentioned as a sought-after feature. They like that they are recognised for their work experience. This is an intrinsic motivation. They like being recognised, valued, and they feel proud about that. Looking at the no columns, it's all about effort, being surprised about how much effort is involved. It's also about not being what they thought it was. Like there will always be gaps. It's launching into the unknown. So marketing needs to be clear exactly what you're offering. Are you offering a service or a guaranteed product? Does this mean we reduce the effort or inform candidates of expected effort? Or we market RPL differently with benefits other than a guaranteed credential product? Let's listen to Brian to see what he has to say. As he speaks, please put your comments and questions in the chat box and we can discuss afterwards.
good to be here, Deb.
Thank you. So I looked at your article recently. It was around the first step of RPL is being competent. And it made me think of this session here, where we're trying to make sure that candidates before they enrol have an idea, have accurate expectations of what's involved, what's not involved. What brought you to the decision to write that article?
Yeah, thank you. The experience over a number of years was that people were coming to or seeking RPL without necessarily understanding a couple of things. The first is that RPL is an assessment process that is not assessing their experience and how vast and how great and rich it is, but rather assessing their experience through the lens of the requirements of units of competency within a qualification. That disconnect between their understanding or expectation and the reality led to a lot of people seeking RPL who were not actually aware of what it means to be competent. And since we're working in the space of the TAA at that time and TAE now, it's fairly important for someone wanting to gain RPL in a qualification such as a TAA or TAE that they probably do understand what competence means. And having an understanding of what they would be assessed in and how that would occur and what can happen as a result of any sort of issues that arise in there was very important to ensure that the process when they did engage was smoother and avoided the problems of tension, friction, misunderstanding, etc. along the way.
And was that the business level problem that was caused by having inaccurate expectations?
Probably the business
that they experienced. Yeah.
The business level problem was probably one that the student experience of the service we delivered was not in line with the product that they were expecting to buy. And as a result of that disconnect, there'd be a lot of angst, animosity, so student satisfaction wasn't so high, word of mouth wasn't so favourable, those sorts of things, and nor was their actual appreciation or value of what it actually was we were doing. So that's one. The other thing was that we then also spent, from a business point of view, we spent a lot of time unnecessarily going through an RPL process with people who it perhaps wasn't at all suitable for, either in whole or in part. So whereas their experience may be aligned with some units, they may be coming in seeking RPL for the entire qualification, but there may be, 70, 80% of the qualification that is entirely, material that is foreign to them. So the business case there is you can go through a process of conducting a full RPL assessment with this person who is increasingly angsty and unappreciative, because they're not just getting the product they're paying for, which ultimately then just leads to them needing to do, the program, and in which case you then have to go through the process of delivering an additional service to them, etc. Now that creates all sorts of costs and things like that, which are difficult to recover after you've already gone down a certain path with this student through an experience that has not been entirely favourable for them, which does not necessarily engender in them a great deal of confidence that they are going to end up getting what it is they believe they paid for in the first place.
Their expectations. Not to mention, it's not a very nice journey for the assessors themselves as well, from my research.
Yeah, brutal, yeah. Very difficult for trainers and assessors, especially those who are in areas that, they're doing it because hard on sleeve, they just love their subject area. They love working with people, and they've got this constant sort of clashing going on.
Yeah. So then, if we could build accurate expectations at the start, a lot of that angst would be lowered. Your assessors might be happier. You invest effort where there is likelihood of satisfaction.
I think there's a couple of things there. One is about investing at the beginning to ensure expectations are clear prior to a decision being made as to whether this is a process that is going to be one they wish to engage in. So with our organisation, with Fortress, we'd say to someone, okay, this is what you can expect when you come on board with us. And we'll have that conversation before you make the decision to enrol, so that when you do enrol, we know that you're aware of what we want, what we're going to be requiring, and therefore that those issues are less likely to appear. So the process of ensuring expectational alignment is not just to ensure someone is on the same page as you, but to ensure that someone who is not does have the opportunity to make a decision to go somewhere else, perhaps where their expectations will be better met.
So during that conversation, what do you think are the key things that you need to communicate to a candidate before enrolment?
I think the key things is to ensure that they understand that they're not buying a product, that this is an exploration of their experience and seeing whether that experience does line up with the requirements of units of competency. That we need to, instead of looking through this vast ball of experience and assuming that it must mean competence, we look at the other way. We look through the units to the experience to see where they do cover. I think making that clear to potential RPL candidates is very important, as is then the need to ensure that they're aware of what happens in the situation where there are gaps. I think the big concern for, and this may have come out in your research, I'm not sure, the big concern for candidates or people looking at RPL is the anxiety associated with it being all or nothing.
Yeah.
In that, okay, well, I'm competent, and I'll swear black and blue they're competent. Why? Because they're petrified that there may be a bit that they're not competent in, and they don't want that to undo everything else. So having an understanding of what can happen, and that there is a pathway forwards if the RPL itself is not, let's say, entirely sufficient.
I found that was really important. The first thing you said around where we're assessing to a unit of competency. We're not assessing all of your experience. We're assessing through the lens of the unit of competency to your experience. And that it becomes very personal. RPL is very personal because this is my experience. It's my work experience. I'm making a claim. This is me. There's nothing more me than 20 years of work history and me saying I'm competent. So yes, I think it is important to make sure that they know that they're being assessed against a matrix, not against a livelihood of experience.
May I share a diagram?
Yes.
What I've got here is, when someone comes looking for RPL, they come with an awareness of their own experience, and quite often it's vast and all-encompassing, an incredible rich tapestry of experience and professional success and personal, satisfaction with their own accomplishments. And one of the first things they'll actually discover is that perhaps it's not necessarily in line with the units. So when a person comes in, they're looking at the units. If you were to sort of turn this slightly on its side into 3D, they're looking through their lens of experience and they see all of the units and they see that it's being covered. But if you put it into more of a 2D nature, we actually find that their experience may well not cover all of the parts of all of the units. And that is then further compounded by, while their experience may be vast, what they've actually retained from that knowledge, what they've retained from that knowledge, that experience in terms of knowledge and skill may even be further reduced, and further reduces the extent to which they are, able to be assessed as currently competent in various units. And in this example, you can see that it's less than half.
Do you think that red rectangle represents currency?
I believe it represents currency, yes. I believe this shows where the potential for RPL assessment would probably lie. And if we're looking at expectations, then my view would be to actually commence the process by focusing, on these two units here that are completely within the red. Yeah.
That came out in the research very clearly, is do the easy, quick ones first.
And I think it builds confidence not just in the fact that it can be done, but also in the, I think also important is people are learning through this process how to do the process. And the RPL process by Fortress Learning is probably going to be different from the next RTO and the next RTO. So they're learning two things. And if we can be with them to take those first steps and get runs on the board, then we're helping them to overcome much of the, the anxiety associated with the process. We're starting to calm the lizard brain, as it were.
Do you, that came out with a couple of the candidates that they would have liked to see what a successful portfolio looks like.
I imagine. And there's two difficulties with that. One is you can have a look at it, but then people look at those things and quite often see them as prescriptive. In which case, if they do not see themselves reflected in the portfolio, then they'll say, that's nonsense. That's not how we do it. and you can move further away from alignment of expectations. I think exemplars of how certain things could be demonstrated is a good example, but to provide an entire portfolio that's complete, I think that for me, to my mind, that'd be too problematic.
So the key things that the process is an assessment, that there, what do we do with gaps? Also that we are looking at your experience through the lens of a skills matrix called units of competency. You didn't mention time. A lot of candidates really wanted some kind of indication how much they should schedule in their life for this. Is there some way that we can do that?
We do, and it's altogether vague, and intentionally so. But it's probably as accurate as it can be, because if we're dealing with an RPL process, we're assessing an individual, and if we look at that diagram, the experience may be vast, but the actual nature of that experience for different people would be positioned differently on the page. Their own level of organisation, their own level of commitment, their own access to documentation, resources, etc., are going to be things that feed into the process which determine its duration. The way we like to communicate that and answer to that question is to say, okay, so our standard students are, and we describe them in demographic terms. They're busy professionals, they're working parents, they've got kids at one end, grandparents at the other, dogs that have to go to the vet, the occasional pandemic that comes along, and they seem to take a night or two a week, and it gets takes this number of months. That seems to be, I believe, a more helpful approach for them, rather than simply saying a certain number of hours. Because it helps them to look at themselves through others who have succeeded and set up their own expectations based on, the so-called normative reference group that they wish to be part of.
Yeah. So we talked about collaborative learning in the last session, and Andy from Canada, he applies the ones that have actually done it. They're part of the group, and they act in kind of a mentor role, and it gives a sense of this can be done.
It's interesting you say that. We have a number of people who work in the same sort of departments or organisations going through the process consecutively, some concurrently. And we've had some people who have been through the process, say, a couple of years ago, who've referred their colleagues who are coming through and doing it now. And those people, through the process of doing it, of mentoring or assisting the new ones, are actually coming and saying, I'm getting just as much out of this, if not more, than I did the first time. And in fact, I had one of them say, can I do it again? Because I think I'd do it better now.
Yeah, well, I think the second time around there would be reduced angst, because there's, it's not the end of the world if you don't get it.
I think helping someone else rather than themselves being the person being assessed helps remove that threat of judgment. And also perhaps because they've been through it themselves and they've seen the value of the reflective process. That's essentially why this man said, I think I'd like to do it again. He hasn't, but he was just expressing the value of the reflective nature of the process.
Yeah, well, let's go down that, Warren. Do you think RPL can be a career management tool?
Certainly it could be, yes.
I think,
well, it's if we view RPL not as being a product, as in not as, I do this, give you money, do this, get a qualification. If we view it instead as a way of benchmarking our own knowledge and skills against what industry needs, and then if the career is basically got something to do with a particular industry, then, the way the whole Australian system anyway set up is that, we have training packages with qualifications, and they embody apparently the knowledge and skills that industry requires. So we can go through a process of RPL to identify where are we now, where do we want to be, and what are the gaps between now and then. And then we can also then use the RPL process to from time to time, put our toe in the water to see, okay, well, have I progressed in this area or that area? It helps them in some ways determine their own perhaps readiness for undertaking further steps at work. Even if it doesn't lead to actual outcomes of qualifications, the process of benchmarking oneself against the components of a unit of competency in a structured way, I believe, could be very valuable.
Yes, there was that feedback from just about every candidate. They felt as if it was almost like a PD, because it made them think about and reflect on their practice. And they all said that their practice had actually improved, but they didn't learn anything, they said.
I think the joy of RPL processes for people is that it's incredibly forgiving, because even if they do learn something, they don't have to admit it.
True. Well, last question is around, do you have experience with inaccurate expectations from employers?
Absolutely. This goes back to your early question about, what happens, what's the commercial issues. Often, and this is particularly the case in the TAE Cert 4 side of things, where people are required to have the qualification, but they don't need it all. Now, there's a lot written and said, probably more said or spoken about whether that qualification is fit for purpose. But the concept here is that quite often employers require their people, their employees, to have certain qualifications or skill sets that are necessary to tick a box in the human resources side of things. Well, that's the perception of people. Now, someone can come in with their big circle of experience and say, I've got to get this bloody thing, excuse me, because the boss said, and if I don't, then I lose my job. And I need to get it by RPL. A, one, they don't want to do it. B, they have to do it. And C, chances are they're not actually, incredibly lined up in terms of their own knowledge and skills.
That puts them in a very awkward position, the candidate.
It puts everyone in a very awkward position. Yes, it does. It puts the candidate in a very awkward position because quite often the RTO, while in a position of some authority, does not necessarily have the same immediate power over them as does their employer, which can lead them to vent their frustration surrounding this whole process and how it's not necessarily proceeding as smoothly as they'd like. It can lead them to express those frustrations toward the RTO. I do not believe that that's a good thing for anyone. Yes, you may get a bit of money from them for enrolling and going through the process, but you'll never see them again. And you won't see any of their colleagues or their friends, and I don't think it does any good for the broader industry and the sense of value of qualifications to have people having those experiences.
Thank you, Brian. We've run out of time. Perhaps in our conversation afterwards, we'll talk about how can we build accurate expectations of employers and some of the other ways that we can, in a efficient type of way, build accurate expectations for potential candidates other than face-to-face conversations.
Very good. Thanks for inviting me to participate.
It's been a pleasure. So we are having a few technical issues. I do apologise that some people haven't been able to come in, including Emma, who is going to speak to that presentation. So just summarising, 4 key things that should be clearly communicated before RPL enrolment. This is a valuable service, but not a guaranteed product. What can they get out of it? What are their expectations? This is an assessment process against a unit of competency and may not consider all candidates' work experience. If they know that, they're not feeling devalued, or their work experience is not being devalued or considered irrelevant. What will happen if there are gaps identified? This needs to be clearly communicated with them, and it could be an opportunity for you to work with other RTOs where there might be, if you don't have that on scope, where they need to enter the coursework pathway. How much time should I expect to invest in this process, and some kind of learning plan that helps them to realise that it's not just a thing that you can do at the end of the day, 10 minutes here and there. So thanks very much, Brian. We did talk about a little bit about employers' expectations, particularly now organisations are trying to adapt their workforce and upskill their workforce. So in helping to build employers' expectations around RPL, perhaps as RTOs can be involved in organisational training needs analysis. And so that first step of critically looking at your workforce and realise what are the existing skills and knowledge that you don't, that are not already obvious, that wasn't on the resume when they applied for the job, or that they've been learning outside the workplace, and that you're not aware of. So RPL can then help employers know what existing skills they have at their disposal, and the morale of workers are also improved because they're valued beyond what is their job tasks. I just want to say there's one other strategy that Brian does use that he didn't mention is a 30-day guarantee. So within 30 days, that person can transition out of RPL without there being a financial penalty. So they get that idea of what is involved, and they feel the experience of conducting it. I have one more slide here that I have got a bit of time to present, and that's the impact score. So my research, I looked at the number of times candidates expressed a difficulty and how many candidates expressed that difficulty, and I multiplied it and came up with an impact of difficulty score. And you might noticed in those previous slides there was a little black tag and it had a number on it. So that's the impact of difficulty score. Each one of those blue bars, it belongs to mindset difficulties, and loss of confidence was the biggest mindset difficulty. So building accurate expectations will have an impact on their mindset and will ultimately improve the RPL experience. So we haven't got any questions. That concludes our session today. Thank you for registering and enjoying this recording. Michelle, would you like to come on now?
Thanks, Deb. It was very interesting to hear what Brian had to say about how they're conducting RPL as a process within their organisation. And your question earlier about whether it was a service or a product was answered very nicely. And I think when you tie that into the expectations that people may have, it's quite illuminating if you're going through an RPL process to understand that this is a service, it's not a product, it's not a guaranteed outcome. So very good there. Also, we've just had some communication from Veta, who supply the technology for the sessions, and potentially there's been a platform difficulty, a big marker technical issue that seems to have been blocking people from being able to enter the webinar. So we're going to have to investigate that further. Veta's taking that up with Big Marker already to try and figure out what has happened, that people can't get on and hear about this process that we're talking about advertising carefully for RPL. So apologies to anyone who had intended to come live. Definitely today's session has been recorded, and Veta have, to my knowledge, communicated with everyone about the issue. So we'll leave it at that, but we'll deal with that as time permits after the session. And definitely thank you to you, Deb, for preparing today's session, for spending the time to talk with Brian, and for sharing the results of your research around this particular topic. And we certainly look forward to live next week, being able to further the discussion when we're talking about keeping assessment tools flexible.
Yeah, there's definitely some things that many RTOs do. For example, interpreting the unit, mandating certain assessment instruments. So they, in effect, put up huge barriers.
Sounds like another interesting session. Can't wait.
Thank you very much for your time, everybody.
Thanks, Deb. Bye now.
Bye-bye.